Hello and welcome to Bios and Bookmarks Season 8, The Complexity of Caribbean Love, powered by the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. I am your guest host for tonight, filling in for Shivani. I'm Caroline Mackenzie, and I will be guiding you through episode 2 with the award-winning and all-around wonderful human, Andre Bagoo. Yay! Hello, Andre. Welcome.
Hello. So good to be
Um,
here.
Good. I'm so glad. Thank you so much for being a part of this and joining us to discuss your very first short story collection, The Dreaming, The Wonderful Dreaming. Now, just to kind of break the ice a little bit, you are a seasoned poet, a celebrated essayist, and now short fiction. Why don't you tell us what the experience of compiling this collection was like, writing it, editing it, selecting the stories? How is that different to what you're sort of used to?
Well, growing up, I always used to write poems and stories alongside one another, even as a little boy. I'm a child of the 90s, and I think a lot of us in the 90s, we had a desktop computer and we didn't quite know what to do with it. So
Yeah.
my dad gave us this computer and I was like, what to do? And the natural thing to do was writing.
Mhm.
So out of that sprung poems and stories. And I continued with it over the years. Eventually, my poetry was published, and that came out of the gate first.
Mhm.
But I still kept on writing stories alongside the poems. And as you know, Caroline, because we were in a writing group,
Yes.
I worked I worked on these stories in this book in particular for about 10 years,
Yeah.
because like so many other writers, you're doing writing in between your day job. Um,
Hmm.
and basically, I was never quite satisfied with what I was doing. I was in love with this short story as a form, but I wasn't quite, I guess I wasn't sure what exactly it was that I had to say.
Hmm.
So it took me quite a while to figure that out. And then eventually in 2020, the pandemic happened. I was on the cusp of publishing my first non-poetry book, which was The Undiscovered Country, the essay
Woo
collection.
woo.
Um, and the publication of that book was halted, as so many books publications
Of
were.
course.
And I was pushed back and pushed back again. And then suddenly everything during the pandemic seemed so tenuous and uncertain. And I just felt as though, okay, wait, I need to start thinking about my own objectives and my own dreams and
Hmm.
goals and what's my next book. And I decided that my next book was going to be a fiction book. And then I finally worked up the courage to send out this manuscript. I sent it to Peepal Tree Press, and then they said yes. And then when they
And
said yes, I panicked because
well,
I
I
was
was
like,
gonna say, you said you worked on the courage, but did you feel a bit more sort of nervous about fiction versus what poetry and non-fiction, the essays? Was it scarier?
I felt as though V.S. Naipaul says this thing. He says facts can be realigned, but fiction never lies.
Mm.
And I think I intuitively sense that fiction is an area of vulnerability, perhaps
Hmm.
more so than many other art forms.
Hmm.
Um, and when Peepal Tree Press said yes, I had this great panic because I was like, oh my goodness, people are really going to read this now. So they had better be good, these stories.
Which they are. They are fabulous.
Well, thank you. But
And
then came like an intense period of editing. That
right.
was and in that period of editing and working through the stories and cutting stories and adding stories, that's when the book actually I discovered what the book was.
Mhm.
Um, and it turns out that the book was a sequel to V.S. Naipaul's Miguel Street. So
Look at
no
that.
pressure, right?
Yeah. So when you were editing, did you then is that when you sort of honed down the stories that you wanted to include, or did you come to Pubaltry with all of these stories sort of pre-selected, or was it a wider selection initially?
So in one of the things that emerged in conversation with Jeremy Ponting of Peepal Tree Press was, I think he noted at one point that yes, the stories did have a very strong sense of place.
They do.
And then it dawned on me that, wait a minute, a lot of these stories are set in Woodbrook. What other book, what other book is set in Woodbrook? And famously, it was Miguel Street. As soon as I had that connection, I kind of knew. Of course, Naipaul is an incredibly influential and important figure for any Trinidadian writer. He's something of a problematic ancestor, of course,
Yes.
because, growing up Trinidadian, we grow up proud of him, and we grow up, just admiring the sheer technical mastery of the prose.
Correct.
But then, as I developed personally, I began to be concerned with certain aspects of his writing, and in particular, his treatment of gay characters. And so when all these things were beginning to operate in my mind, I thought, oh yeah, it would be kind of incredible to kind of respond not only to Miguel Street, but perhaps to some absences within his work in a kind of a critical way through the guise of fiction.
Perfect.
Which is not to say this is an academic treatise. It's very much a book of stories.
Yes,
but that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. Well, why don't we give people a taste of the collection? Let's go jump into reading number 1.
Sure. So The Dreaming, it's very much a book about a group of gay men coming to terms with life in Trinidad and embarking on a journey to find love, sex, pleasure, and self-actualization. But the book is also very much, as I mentioned, by referring to Naipaul, it's very much a book about writers.
Yes,
And
definitely.
It's in dialogue with many, many writers. And one of the writers it's in dialogue with is Lawrence Scott. And I'm going to be reading from a story in the book called Preludes, which is kind of like a kind of engagement with Lawrence Scott's story, A Dog is Buried. In the story, the main character, Fin Singh, who actually dominates the final act of the collection because the stories towards the end are interconnected. He's just come back from a trip to London. He's just come back to his home in Trinidad. I came straight from the airport. When we turned off the road, the taxi drove through a thicket of almond trees. It was nighttime, and the taxi's lights cast shadows that made the trees multiply. Soon, I could see the house at the edge of the cliff. And already, what had been a memory came roaring back at me. The sea. Booming, murmuring, overwhelming. Fresh sea breeze blew into the car. I had come back to live on the island. My family was expecting me at Londonville. This was before I moved to Woodbrook. But first, I would stay here for a few days, a welcome home gift to myself. Trevor, for that was the name on the card he gave me, parked the taxi at the front of the beach house. I asked him to wait while I opened up. I had keys. We had picked them up from the housekeeper along the way. I had stayed at this house before. I had told the housekeeper there was no need for him to come with me at this hour of the night. He said the house was aired and there were a few basics in the fridge. I noticed the outside light, which worked with a timer, was not on. As I fumbled in the carport for the switch, I noticed the foul scent. I flipped the switch, but the bulb did not light. I stumbled over something heavy. I ran back into the open yard where there was moonlight. Trevor brought a torch. I suddenly saw how attractive he was. We followed the beam of light into the carport. The dead dog, revealed itself. Its throat was slit. Blood had caked into molasses and oozed out of the wound. Little rice grains, maggots, crawled from its mouth. Its blood dyed a burlap bag, revealing its tightly woven threads. There was a trail of blood. Someone had dragged the dead dog hair from the front yard over the pale gravel. I followed this trail, but it vanished in the direction of the neighbor's house, where I knew a few kids lived. Trevor started the car, and I thought he was leaving, but he was really turning the car around to direct its beams onto the garage.
Oh, Andre, I think you may have frozen. I think you may be stuck there. Andre. I think Andre may be experiencing some technical difficulties. What I can do is continue reading from where Andre was while we rectified the issue. So let me get to that. Good thing. Always good to have a copy of the book handy. And yeah, we're just going to roll with it, right? So, Preludes, where are you? Okay. Bear with me. I am just going to find where Andre was, and I'm just going to carry on reading. Not nearly as eloquently or beautifully as Andre, because Andre is a phenomenal reader. I've actually often said, I'm just going to share here because I'm just, killing time with you all at this point, that I would love Brianne McIver to write my eulogy, and I would really, really love Andre to read it. So I'm putting that out there in the event of my untimely or eventual death. I'm just going to stop rambling and just find the spot. The prelude. So, where are we? Right, he's just come back to Trinidad. And Andre, thank God, because I'm doing a lot of rambling.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh my God, I was just about to continue to pick up from where you were.
Sorry.
And then, yeah, so you just carry on. I
I'll
did
just
go on a
carry
bit of a
on.
tangent about you reading my eulogy. So please, for the love of God, don't cut off again.
I'll try not to. I'll try not to. So I'll resume from.
Carry on.
It seemed like an ominous sign. I think that's a fitting place to resume from.
I think so.
It seemed like an ominous sign. It didn't match with anything I was feeling inside. I had been longing to return for so long. On mornings in London, I would wake up in my dreary, cramped lodging at Crouch End and imagine the sweet aroma of a tropical, sun-ripened mango, not the garbage they had at Sainsbury's. I would hear the wind rustling through the trees in our yard in Londonville. I missed our mango tree, our coconut tree, our sour cherry tree, the pomsite, the neighbor's cashew tree, the 10-pound sabacas that would hang and sway like mute green church bells. For many months, I would ring Enrico, who would always pick up the phone during his shift at Wendy's, and cry into the receiver. It didn't help that things hadn't worked out with Robert, nor did they work out with Roger, nor Hanson, nor Charlie. Even online hookups were tough, a sea of rejection. No Asians, no blacks, no femmes, no fats. No offense, but not into Arabs. At bars, I was chronically shy, and people would ignore me when I mustered the courage to make conversation. Those people I did manage to bed consumed me only because they felt I was rare and exotic in some way. They could see no further than that. I had believed that in leaving Trinidad, I would be set free. Instead, I became invisible. When Enrico sent the job vacancy he saw for a firm near him in Woodbrook, it was a simple decision. I wanted Trinidad. Did Trinidad want me? I suddenly felt incredibly tired and jet lagged. Trevor said he'd come with me inside the house with the torchlight. There was no power. If someone had been here recently, I could not tell. Nothing was disturbed. No air had entered for months. There was a musty, dank smell. There were thick, chunky candles and matches in a kitchen drawer that I lit, revealing dust and cobwebs, and I wondered if Miss Havisham lived here. A pile of old magazines was strewn on the coffee table. Twigs and clove-like droppings indicated bats. I opened the window. I opened the doors to the veranda overlooking the cliff. Sea breeze rushed in, beastly and magnificent. Trevor stood next to me, looking at the vastness. The full moon lit a white, sparkling path leading to some place beyond the night. I'll help you, he said. We each took a corner of the bag and dragged it. The dog felt unyielding, as though a powerful magnet was pulling it deep into the earth. Had it been someone's pet? It looked like one of those feral country dogs that roamed the streets. We took it far away to a part of the cliff where the soil was soft, but not too soft, under some coconut trees. The breeze here was powerful, but the stench remained. We had a fork and spade from the garage and took turns digging. We turned to the sea now and then and took in big gulps of air. In the moonlight, Trevor took off his shirt, and suddenly, through this close proximity, through the shock of our shared labor, I got a real sense of him, how he moved, how tall he was, how broad his shoulders were, the shapeliness of his limbs. We put the dog in the pit and started to cover it with soil. I took off my shirt too. Our bodies glistened with sweat. I could hear the engine of the surf hissing as though it was powered by hot steam. Eventually, the task was done. Strangely, in burying something, I felt something else had been unearthed. I have rum in my carry-on, I said. Good, I need a drink real bad, he replied. I remembered there was an outdoor shower at the back of the house. I found some blue soap. I let him go first. In the murk, I could see him take off all his clothes, as though he had done so in front of me several times before. The pipe sputtered, then exploded when he turned on the tap. As the water hit him, he moaned. Then he beckoned me to come. The pressure real good, he said. The water was cool, cold almost, and the pressure of the jet from the nozzle was sharp and bruising, firing thousands of hard pearls at my flesh. I gasped. He laughed. And then he soaped me, casually, easily, as though we had done this some time before and were used to it. His casualness emboldened me. I held him. He kissed me. And it was as though I was swallowing the night sky with its diamond stars, the black ocean with its orange welts of oil rigs in the distance, the spidery coconut trees dancing their shadow ballet against the moon, the sea foam and the sea spray, the memory of the dead dog, of death, of my desire to come home. It was as though it was all filling me. I drank in his salty taste. I held his dick in my hand and felt I was holding some heavy fruit, some memory, some dream. We never opened the rum. The housekeeper knocked on the door. I jumped up in bed, startled. I was alone in the small bedroom. I was naked among a creased sea of crumpled sheets. I found my trousers and, inspecting myself in the mottled mirror, tried to look unsexed. Sorry about the power, the housekeeper said when I got outside. I fixed the problem. I saw Trevor's taxi was not in the yard. A wave of sadness crashed on the rocks inside me. I dug into my trouser pockets. I found the card he had given me. With my hand still in my pocket, I held onto the card as though holding a memory. I continued the conversation with the housekeeper, telling him about the dog. It was that miserable child next door, he said, without hesitation. He's been killing things all week. I'll speak with the mother again. Kids these days, yes? They're watching all that Harry Potter sorcery stupidness. When the housekeeper left, when I was finally alone, the world around me settled into something unreal. Memories of the night before came back. How we had kissed, how I had trailed my tongue from his lips to his ears to his neck, and then down to his left nipple, down along his chest. How I had knelt before him and swallowed the entirety of his wet cock. How we had somehow made it to the bedroom, dusting off the bed. How I lay on my back as he parted my legs, then lifted them up towards my head. How I could hear waves crashing as he pounded me until I came. How we lay arm in arm before falling asleep. For a moment, these memories mixed with my elation at being home. But then disappointment overcame me, because what had happened, the whole ordeal with the dog, the way the entire encounter had seemingly brought us together, had ended so easily with the sunrise. Trevor had told me he lived in Caranage with his sister and his mom. Would I ever see him again? There was a number on the card. I told myself I would ring him later. My phone had died in the night. The house appeared oddly clean, cleaner than it had been last night, as though someone had removed a heavy filter from an image and allowed us to see what was there all along. The place was organ warm, pulsing, pure sunlight, sunlight as clear as white wine, burst through the windows, through the veranda doors, through the little holes left for wind to enter. A breeze was blowing. Birds sang. I had no idea what time it was. I went into the yard. I saw it. The taxi hadn't gone as I had thought. He'd gotten up early, parked it discreetly at the side of the house. I walked down the worn, rocky steps, pieces of which had been interchanged over the years like some kind of Frankenstein construction. They led to the small bay beneath the house. All in front of me, the aquamarine waves beckoned, their alternating allegro and adagio speaking of some happiness to come. And there he was on the sand, walking towards me.
Ah, gorgeous and riveting as always, Andrew. I'm totally mesmerized. What a beautiful reading, and just your descriptions of setting. Dreamy, I guess, is a fitting word given the title of the collection. But the orange welts. Anyway, gorgeous, beautiful, breathtaking. You can see, the poetry in the language. But listen, when I first read this story, and then when I reread it again today, preparing for the interview, it kind of it made me think of a reference you had in the final story in the collection, Not Looking, where your protagonist is working on a manuscript in which he wants to write about gay characters living this really idyllic, joyful life in Trinidad, and nothing bad happens, and all of the harsh realities of living here as a gay man are totally skimmed over, or do not exist at all in this world. And he wants to create this sense of hope and optimism. And I wondered how you felt in writing these stories, because for me, this one, the ending of the prelude, is so hopeful and beautiful and utterly romantic. And I felt like it was the most uplifting and hopeful of the collection. So did you have that same sense as your protagonist in Not Looking, of wanting to kind of toe that line and not write something that was depressing, but while still wanting to be, true, accurate then?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was tracking was, and it's something actually that I noticed about Miguel Street, and indeed in all of Naipaul's writing, which is this idea, and I guess it's a colonial idea, that in order for us to be happy, whatever our sexuality, we somehow have to um, leave, the Caribbean space. We have to leave Trinidad, and I guess potentially especially for members of the LGBTQ community, certainly for me growing up, there was this feeling that, yeah, in order to be happy, uh, you had a better chance going somewhere else. But I wanted to challenge that and reverse that journey. So I did want. So it was deliberate. I did want this character to go through this kind of, they go through all of this and they go away, but then they come right back, and they become kind of resolute in this desire to stick around and try and find happiness here, or try and make things better here. Certainly, and you bring up the character in the last story, Not Looking. Certainly, that too was all a part of it for me, because I wanted to get as varied a sense of what things are like, things can be like for many people within the LGBTQ community in Trinidad, and just generally for citizens as a whole. Our
Yes.
experiences are diverse and different. Some of us are thriving, some of us are not. So I mean, it's a brilliant question, because I definitely wanted that sort of spectrum of experience.
Right. And it does, as you say, have that broader application, because we do tend to, as growing up, we all have this sense of the grass is greener and Trinidad isn't enough, and there is this kind of exodus, that's then very counterproductive, because if we're not all here, we're not all trying to make it better. How will it get better? How will it be this rich playground that we need it to be to thrive as artists and people generally? So yeah, I thought that was just brilliant all around. And as you're saying as well, in showing the different experiences, your stories also span quite a large period of time. You have stories like 1960, for instance, that explore the gay experience in the 1960s. There's mentions of the 1980s as well, right up, the early 2000s to today. So was that intentional as well, to kind of show, excuse me, how things may be different, but also maybe very much the same for people in the LGBTQ community here?
I was really fascinated with, going back in time, and and also, at one stage I was thinking of imagining what life might be like for a queer character during the time of Miguel Street. So I did
Right,
all of
right.
that in my mind. So that, hence, that's where the story, that story in the book comes from. Well, it's a little bit set a little after Miguel Street, maybe a decade or
Right.
two after, but that is what I was thinking, and it has actually been really incredible getting the responses that I've received to this book so far. In all of the readings that I've done, be it at Paper Based or at Songshine. I mean, when I was writing, I must confess, I was really obsessed and focused on the art, right? I was
Of
really
course.
actually, yes, I was aware of the politics and the social context and all of that, but I'm just in love with the short story, and I was really deeply, intensely involved in that, and I don't think I was actually prepared for the way so many people have responded to a lot of. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional. Like,
No, that's so
I just
nice. Tell us
the
more.
the way that, I mean, you talk, we were talking just now about, the spectrum of experience. Some people are happy, some people are not, and just this idea of visibility and being seen and being represented in fiction, I kind of, I mean, I obviously I'm aware that that's important, but I didn't quite anticipate how impactful it would be for other
Mhm.
people to experience that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that was one of my questions was going to be who would be your ideal who would you most want to read this book and how would you most want them to react? So I'll ask that now.
I think first of all, I want everybody to read this book. Please go out and buy it. It's available at Peepal Bookshop. It's just generally, it's well written.
It's,
It's just,
I endorse that statement.
um, but funnily enough, I was asked a question similar to this a few days ago at the British Virgin Island Literary Festival. I was actually asked, well, what is the purpose of your work? What is the purpose of your writing? Which brings me to this: who am I writing for? And part of me, a very, very uh, um, deep part of me, you know, dreams of writing for just one person,
Mhm.
one teenager growing up, looking to find themselves in literature, looking to see
Mhm.
themselves represented, maybe finding this book in a bookshop, opening it, and thinking, "Oh yeah, that happened to me too."
Mhm.
That is kind of who I'm ideally writing for. But I
Yeah.
think even even as I have that specific dream and vision and hope, the thing about literature is no matter how specific a story is, it is precisely in the peculiarity of a story that it achieves a kind of universality. So I think
Yes.
what all of these characters go through, I mean, all of the struggles they have searching for love, for instance, I think that's something everyone can relate to. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah,
so yeah.
absolutely. And so these stories are also, as we saw, well, heard in the prelude, very steamy. So that's part one. And what I'm going to ask. Part two is I also noticed that there's a lot of references to music in the collection. There's ranging from Drake to Schumann, Handel. So music is obviously something that you care a lot about and are very
Mhm.
connected to. So when you are writing these very steamy and sensual scenes and moments, do you use music a lot in your writing process? What's the process of that like? Or are you just kind of like pulling from memory, pulling from stories? How does it work?
That is a brilliant question, Caroline. I love how you've weaved those two things together. Um, I will say that I thought long and hard, and I thought really deeply about the sex in the book. Um, Part of me felt as though, certainly within some spaces within the Caribbean, maybe Catholic, Christian, certain spaces in the Caribbean, I felt as though there's a tendency to elide sex generally, not even sexuality. Like sex
Yeah,
doesn't,
yeah, yeah.
we have to kind of suppress it, sweep it under the
Mm-hmm.
carpet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I kind of wanted to challenge that, particularly when I also considered the politics of a book in which all the characters are queer. I didn't want to seem, or I didn't want to censor myself. I wanted to ensure that I was going there. And also for me, sex became, it became a key to characterization.
Right. Yeah.
Sex is sex is never just sex. Sex occurs in a context, and it reveals so much about the people who are participating in it. Um, and I was adamant about that. And so there's actually a story in here that's actually structured around a group of sexual interactions that a couple goes through. But that story is one of the most incredibly emotional things that I've ever written, because it's,
Really?
the whole point of it is to show that sex is never something that exists in a vacuum. It is
Mm-hmm.
wedded to all of these emotions and feelings and thoughts and hopes and dreams and aspirations, and it's not something to be dismissed. And particularly in the context of the LGBTQ community, and I guess also you could say this happens in patriarchal society, where there is this slut shaming, for instance, that takes place,
Mm-hmm.
where people are
Mm-hmm.
criticized or looked down upon for just being in connection with their sexuality,
Mm-hmm.
notwithstanding the fact that, Carnival Monday and Tuesday, everybody, let go.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Well, we could
you know,
stay here picking that apart for
yeah,
for hours.
there's this strange kind of hypocrisy and double
Yeah.
standard. So I really wanted the sex to be present, and I really, really wanted it to be key to character. And in some cases in the book, some of the stories are about closeted characters who have a fraught relationship with their sexuality. And in those stories, no logistics of sex appears. And that is deliberate because they are, they are blocked off. So the narrative actually enacts that blocking. But in stories where people are comfortable with their sexuality, we get the fullest expression of that in the
Ah,
writing.
yes. Yeah.
So there
Yeah.
was a whole
Huh.
spectrum there's a whole system in operation.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, okay, I need to do some picking apart and rereading carefully. But yeah, no, that's amazing, and it's such a good point.
But
Characterization, obviously, would be, and the music. Sorry,
the
yes.
music, so this is the brilliant part. So I am a huge, Toni Morrison is a huge influence. And,
Mhm.
she once spoke of, you could never, uh, replicate the music in writing, but the music can be this kind of conduit by which you clarify the emotions that you wish to convey.
Mhm.
And for me, music was a huge part of the process of writing this. There were times when I wanted to understand a character and I just needed to get it right. And I would hear a song and I was like, oh yes, that song is this character. Um,
Wow. Do you
yeah,
have any
yeah.
examples? Can we
So
get a
for the
playlist?
yeah, yeah, you definitely can, because for the last story, Not Looking, that character is Alicia Keys' Unthinkable, but a cover done by
Right.
Bareface.
Right.
So
Very specific there.
that's very specific. I'll probably have to hold back a little bit, but some of the other stories, there's a whole carnival playlist in Selected Boys. There's a whole set of soca. Kez appears.
Wow. I mean, you should definitely put that playlist together. Uh, Andre, are you freezing on me again? Oh God. Yep. Okay. I think we have a technical hiccup again, but that's okay. We can power through. So I'll share with you guys the fact that I was lucky enough to see some of these stories in their nascent stages. Andre and I are part of a little writing trio. It's me, Andre, and the wonderful Brianne McIver. And some of these stories, I was fortunate enough to be there when Andre first started writing them, and just to kind of share in that excitement of a great piece of writing coming to light. One of these stories that he's talking about with that playlist with Soka and whatnot is Bad Talking Boys, and I mean the opening is so funny, and um, and I remember being really struck by how brilliantly Andre is able to merge sex, heart, and humor. He does just a brilliant job of that. It's okay. I was smooth. I got it. You're all good. I was just telling everybody how I'm part of a writing group, and I was there when you started writing Bad Talking Boys, and you're so great at merging humor and sex and heart and the intricacies of relationships. So without further ado, why don't we jump into your second reading?
Yes, certainly. So hopefully the internet. I don't know what's going on with the internet, but
That's all right. I got it. I got
uh,
your back.
I'm going to read from one of the early stories in the book called Conundrum.
Great.
If you were honest, the leg was okay, but not wow. There it was, a stubby, artless thing, impressively muscular yet impassive, drowned in the hazy sea of the sepia filter. Newton clicked like, not because of any particular enthusiasm, but because he felt this was the kind of thing he had to do. He had to put himself out there, ensure he was seen, let it be known that he liked legs and well toned legs too. This leg in question belonged to Duane, a trainer Newton followed on Instagram. Duane had a boyfriend but was into books, and on learning Newton was a poet, followed Newton back and expressed an interest in Newton's writing. This was the previous July. Then the interest petered out, as it inevitably did when people read Newton's work. But both men continued to like each other's posts every now and then, in the awkward netherworld between indifference and not wanting to offend by unfollowing. Newton had recently deleted Grindr again. Men there were weird, flaky, or not interesting. Whenever he thought he'd found someone who might want to do more than exchange dick pics, he would send a face pic and they would fall silent. He didn't understand this. He wasn't that old, and in the right lighting, he was rather attractive with his cute dimples, his manly Roman nose, his father's, intense eyes and long eyelashes, his mother's. His fashion sense was nothing to write home about, consisting of smart glasses, plaid shirts, and multiple pairs of Converse sneakers. But didn't that qualify as geek chic these days? He was marketable, a catch in fact. And weren't people attracted to poets? Hadn't that worked for Byron, Shelley, Keats, Rimbaud? Talent, creativity, passion, a profound engagement with the world. What man on Grindr could resist? It wasn't just the men online. It was the cool, pretty boys at boy code parties, the muscle Marys at carnival fetes, the slightly pretentious gays at drink wine bar, the drunk, sketchy gays at club studio, the nerds at his Nallis book club, and the artsy, sexually fluid crowd at galleries and backyard art spaces, all of whom rebuffed his whines and attempts at small talk. While gay Trinidad was reluctant to embrace him, straight Trinidad couldn't get enough of him. Newton was caught up in dalliances with ostensibly heterosexual men, all of whom he felt was slightly crazy or at least confused. He knew enough about closet cases to impose clear limits. He lowered his expectations again and again and told himself it was just sex, not love. Yet still, some of these men lingered in his mind, hard rocks in his sea of longing. If only one, just one, could find the courage to be truthful, to love him, and to love him only, and to love him openly. If only. It was in a half-depressed, half-bored mood that he scrolled through the list of people who had liked Duane's leg day post. An action he didn't find the least stalkerish. It was research. Most of the men who approved of the leg were probably gay or, at the very least, interested in the male body. He followed anyone on the list whose profile was pleasant. Put yourself out there, he thought. Klaus followed back immediately. Newton had never seen his profile, recognized none of his friends, and could not be sure what country he was in, though he thought Klaus had that charming, sharp look that indicated he was definitely a Trini. Klaus had a handsome face with a big hipster beard and a Bollywood vibe. He was evidently obsessed with working out. Every post was from the gym, one with his biceps flexed, a video of him doing pull-ups, a cocky bulge visible in his joggers, an image of him throwing a tire around. It was all the kind of thing Newton was attracted to, but normally passed over, because he thought such men were compensating for some emotional or physical deficiency, or were in the throes of some kind of body dysmorphia against which he'd never be able to compete. Today, though, he didn't have much to lose. In the first few minutes of their interaction, Klaus liked 30 of Newton's Instagram posts, a gesture which Newton found more ambiguous than it was. Was it a clear red flag? Too eager, too soon? Or just a safe way of expressing interest without explicitly doing so? It could have been a routine series of likes, the way some young people swipe and swipe, all the while clicking like without much real deliberation. There was only one way to find out.
Fabulous. And a perfect example of what I'm talking about. You are so funny. So, humor. Who are your inspirations when it comes to writing humor? I'm sure you're going to say Naipaul, obviously, but is there anyone else?
Yes, I mean, certainly. I mean, and again, that is another Naipaul connection with the book,
Mhm.
the sense of humor. But um, I think life is pretty hard if you don't have a sense of humor.
Boy.
Personally, I think, you know, I've been through so many experiences where humor and comedy have quite literally saved my life. I went through one stage where I had a tough time, and I actually, during this time, started to take not comedy classes. They were acting classes, actually,
I
with
remember your acting
with
classes. Yes.
with Freddie Kassoon.
Right, right.
The late Freddie Kassoon. Mr. Kassoon had called me one day and asked me if I was interested in coming along to his famous classes, and that was the start of a journey which led all the way to me appearing on stage in a production of his,
Amazing.
playing a stern, uptight doctor. So I was well cast.
Oh my
But
God, fantastic.
yeah, but definitely Naipaul. And I think in terms of my own writing influences, I love writers who are funny, but I think I tend to also like writers who are more sad or more somber. So
Really?
yeah, but
Yeah.
that's
So,
just me.
so the funny just come. It's just you. It's just
I
you.
feel so. I feel so.
Well, it's beautifully executed. And on to our next segment of the show. We're going to do a little something fun called Walking to the Revolution. So, Andre, I want you to imagine that your book is on its way to a life changing protest held in honor of the social and political issue closest to your heart. The Dreaming is walking hand in hand down the street with two other books by its side, books that are an intense and catalytic conversation with it. Which books are those and why?
So the first book that comes to mind is, and it's an edition that was published, I think, last year by MIT Press, and it's the complete novels of Guillaume Dustin. I hope I'm not massacring his French name.
No, you didn't.
And these books are incredible because they are all about someone just writing unabashedly about queer life, and they are stylistically concerned with a kind of a subversion of what
Mhm,
are expectations for the literary genre. What is a good book supposed to look like?
mhm,
Um, so that would be one. The other would be, of course, Miguel Street, because it's certainly a catalytic, text. The text that
yes.
triggered a lot of thought and thinking on my part, and triggered a lot of not only the stories in this book, but my own writing sensibility.
Mhm,
Naipaul is as I mentioned, a problematic ancestor, and there's a lot about him that uh, I struggle to grapple with. But
mhm.
certainly growing up, while I was admiring him in the beginning, and I've written out extensively about this, by the way, in the
Yes,
Undiscovered
yes,
Country.
I know.
So please refer to that if anybody wants to find out more about this. But one of the things I got from him was I really fell in love with his aesthetic, his approach to prose,
Mhm,
whereby the prose has to be very crystal clear. It has to feel like a well-oiled machine. It has to
mhm,
run like you have to feel like a chill wind has just passed through that will not relent. Like that
mhm,
that approach to prose was, I realized, very influential. And also his his vantage point of being a writer who brings news of the world to readers. That, to me, is also what I seek to do, be it in the idea that a work of fiction can bring news of the world to readers, can explain or can open up doors to other vantage points that we don't have access to otherwise, or be it the way an essay or an essay collection can do the exact same thing, or even a book of poems. So yeah, so even as I push against, or as I dialogue with, or I clap back at him, I still feel like this book is alongside with me on this walk to the revolution, which, by the way, is such an amazing, a wonderful phrase. Whoever came up with that phrase at Bocas,
Who could
you're
it
a
be?
genius.
I mean, come
it
on,
must be Shivani.
come on, Shivani. I mean,
It
listen
must-
to that. I mean, what's the word? A book in intense and catalytic conversation. That is Shivani. She's good, man. She's good.
yeah. Because we think of revolution as something that is, very virulent and it's fiery, but the idea that revolution can be a steady, slow tread, I think is
Insidious.
far more insidious, although that's slightly pejorative. But I think it's far more hopeful to think of progress and change as coming in that way.
Yes. And on that note, what are you working on next? What are you working on now? What can we expect from you in the near future?
I'm actually working on a new story. So I think the thing with, as you know, when you write a book, it just opens up so much. And in the process of putting together the dreaming, I went through such a journey where, I had thought the writing was done. I had thought the stories were done. And then I just exploded. And I would literally be seized by stories, and I could do nothing but sit down and write out these stories. And unfortunately for me, that continues to occur. So we will see when
that's
next.
Great.
Not if you're my dog who needs to be walked. And I'm just here typing away all
you've got to suffer through Chaplin. That's that's part of it. That's part of it. Oh gosh, is Chaplin there? Can we say hello to Chaplin before
Chaplin
we have to sign off?
He's safely ensconced in another room because he tends to likes to participate in the events. So I thought
he likes his spotlight. Oh,
yeah,
well, next time, bring him a little bow tie.
I don't know where he gets that from.
I know, it's crazy. Oh gosh. Well, Andre, it has been a joy. It has been so much fun getting to see each other for the first time in God knows how long. So this has just been amazing, and I hope everyone out there has thoroughly enjoyed Andrew's readings. How could you not? Who else would you want to listen to with that velvety voice? And yes, thank you for joining us here at Bios and Bookmarks. I'm sorry for babbling at you. There was couple of technical hiccups that we had there, but it's been a lot of fun for me as guest host tonight. And thank you again to our sponsors, the NGC, Bocas Lit Fest, and thank you for everyone for joining in.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I really enjoyed this. Thank you to Bocas. And I would just like to say to anyone out there, if you have any questions or comments, or you feel the need to get in touch with me, please feel free to reach out to me on social media.
Yes. And Andre's Instagram is well updated. He's very good on social media, so and very prolific. So there's always a new book coming out or something exciting happening. So feel free to tune in and look forward to lots of exciting updates from Andre. And that's it from us here at Bios and Bookmarks. Have a good night, everyone, and thank you again. Bye.